Hey everyone, welcome back to Brainstorm. This is Python for NCEA. Now, in this video, we're going to continue looking at loops. Specifically, we're going to take a look at for loops. Now, if you've forgotten about why we would want to use loops in the first place, we're going to use loops whenever we want to repeat something in our programs. Alright, so let's get into it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at how for loops work on strings, and then we're going to move on to using for loops with numbers. So let's start by getting a string from the user. So let's go my string is equal to, and then we're going to take an input actually. So we say input, please enter a string. So we're going to get input from the string, input from the user, sorry, and we want to print every single line, or every single letter onto a line in the idle shell, into a separate line on the idle shell, right? So how do we do that? Well, if we wanted to use a while loop, we could write one, and we actually did that in the last video if you want to check that out. But using a for loop, it's a little bit easier. So the keyword for using a for loop is we write the words for, so for. Then we put a variable name. Now this variable name can be anything. We usually denote this variable by the letter I. So we usually write for I, but it can be anything. It could be for letter, it could be for X, it could be for Z. So just to make things a bit clearer, let's use for letter, and then we write in my, and then you put the variable that you want to loop through. So remember, my string is going to be a string, and we want to loop through the string. So we're doing for letter in my string. Then we put a semicolon. So if we break this down a little bit, so we've got that for keyword there. So what this is saying is for something, for some value in my string. So for every letter in the string specified up here. So if the string there was bottle, for example, for every letter in bottle, let's do something. Now remember, I could call this thing anything here. I call it I. So usually when we do for loops, we usually write for I in my string. Okay, but it doesn't really matter. So you'll also note that I didn't actually define this variable anywhere in our program. It only has to be defined in our actual for loop line here. Okay, so we've put a semicolon, press enter, see it's indented. And then what do we want to do? Well, what we want to do is we want to print that letter. So we're going to go print, and we're going to put the variable name letter here. So what it's going to do, whatever string I've put in here, it's just going to print the letter, then it's going to go to the next letter. So essentially, if this letter here, or this string here was hello, what it would do is it will loop through. So let me write hello here to make it a bit more easier to see what's happening. So what it will do is it will loop through the entire string for the letter, for letters, or for a letter in my string. Let's print the letter. So what it's going to do, it's going to start from the start. You know, H, it's going to print H. It's going to print E. It's going to print L. It's going to print L. And it's going to print O. And then we've reached all the letters in the string, so it's going to stop the for loop. So if I save this and click F5, please enter a string. Let's enter the string hello. And what you can see is it prints every letter on a separate line. Let's do another example. Let's take a string where the user enters a bunch of numbers. So let's call it my second string. And we're going to take the input still as a string. Okay, so input, please enter a string of numbers. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to take that string of numbers, and what we're going to do for every single digit in that number, we're going to check if it is divisible by 5. If it's not divisible by 5, we'll print false, and if it is divisible by 5, we'll print true. So we're going to use Boolean values in this case. So what are we going to do? The first thing is we want to use a for loop to do this. So we're going to use for, and remember I need to specify a variable that we're going to use as our counter to loop through or count through every letter in our string. I'm going to use I in this case. So for I in my second string. So what this is going to do is it's going to loop through every single digit in our string of numbers. So if my string of numbers was 1, 2, 3, 4, what this line is going to do is it's going to say, hey, for every value in the second string, let's loop through. So I, in this case, is 1. Then I will become 2. I will become 3. And then I will become 4. So it actually might make more sense for us to write 4 number in my second string or 4 digit in my second string. I think I'll go with that. Now, what do we want to do for every single digit in my second string? Well, what we want to do is we want to print whether it's divisible by 5. So, print. So what we'll print is we'll print the integer version of the digit mod 5 is equal to 0. So what this is saying is it's saying take the integer version of digit. So remember that this is a string. So this is going to be the string of 1. So let's convert it to an integer. So now we've got 1. Let's mod it with 5. And if it is divisible by 5, it'll equal 0. So this will print true. If it's not divisible by 5, it will print false. So, we should actually probably print the actual digit there, just so we know whether our program is doing the correct thing or not. So let's save that and click F5, and we'll enter the string for this first one here. We'll just put in brain. Okay, and now let's enter a string of numbers. Let's enter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what it's done is it's looped through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's looked at 1. Is 1 divisible by 5? It's saying it's false. Is 2 divisible by 5? No, it's not. Is 3 divisible by 5? Is 4 divisible by 5? And is 5 divisible by 5? Now 5 is obviously the only number here which is divisible by 5, so that's the only one that's true. Alright, so we've looked at using for loops on strings, but what would happen if, for example, we had a string and I wanted to grab the index of that string? Well, we can't do that using the for loop techniques that we've learned so far, so let's take a look at what we call the range function. Now what the range function does is it returns a sequence of numbers, and that's going to be particularly useful, especially when we look at lists and dictionaries. So how does the range function work? Well, we write range, we have opening and closing brackets, and what goes inside the brackets is the start, the stop, and the step value. So the start value is the number that we start at. The stop value is the number in the sequence we want to stop at, and this is non-inclusive. So this is inclusive, start is inclusive, stop is non-inclusive, and step is the value we want to step by. So if my range was 1, 6, 1, then I would start at 1. I would go, so my sequence of numbers would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because we're stepping by 1, and we are not including 6, so the numbers before 6. Now, if I was to make this 2, what we would get is 1, 3, 5, and then we'll just skip to 7, but remember that we are stopping just before 6, so that wouldn't be included. Now, how do we use the range function with our for loops? So what we'll do is we'll say, hey, I want to print exactly 10 numbers, the numbers 1 to 10 on a separate line. The way we do that is we write for, we need a variable, we're going to call it I, for I in range, and we're going to use the range function. So because we want to print the numbers 1 to 10 inclusive and stepping by 1, what we're going to do is we're going to use start at 1 and stop at 11, because we're going 10 plus 1 because we want to include 10, and we're going to step by 1, but usually if we're stepping by 1, that's the default, so we don't need to include that in our range function. We're going to put the semicolons, and then what do we want to do? So for I in range 1 to 11, what do we want to do? Well, we just want to print I. So what you can do is you can think of I as a counter. So I is counting what iteration of the loop, or what iteration of our count we are currently at. So for example, I will be 1, I will then be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, up until 10. Okay, so if we save this and click F5, what we should do is what should happen is we should see that it goes from 1 to 10. And as you can see, it goes from 1 to 10. So that's a interesting use of the for loop. And just to re-emphasize the fact that I do not have to call it I can call it for number and just print number, save and run it, and it's going to do the same thing. Now, let's look at using the range function on strings. So we're going to do the exact same thing up here, where we're going to loop through a string and print every letter on a new line. But we're going to have to do it using the range function. So the way we would do that is we would say, let's get my string is equal to input, please enter a string. So the user is going to enter a string. And what we're going to do is we're going to go for I in range. Now, how do we get the range? So essentially, because we're doing this with the range function, we're going to be working with the numbers, or specifically the indexes of the string. So the indexes of the string are going to be found if we get the length of the string first. So what we're going to do is we're going to say for I in range, the length of my string. Now, because remember that our default for the starting value is actually 0, we do not have to put 0 like this. So what we're saying here is go from 0 all the way until the length of the string, but don't include it. So remember that when we're working with indexes, our indexes go from 0 up until the length of the string minus 1. So if my string is hello, now the length of this string is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're going for I in range 0 up until 4. So remember the index goes from 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this right here is going to give me the index of every single letter in my string. Now remember, this value of I is the counter. So for every iteration of the loop, what I mean by iteration is every time the loop repeats itself, it's going to be a different value of I. So it's going to start at H, on the second iteration it's going to be E, and on the last iteration it's going to be O. So let's put our semicolon there, and let's print my string at index I. So, and now, usually, because 0 is our default there, we don't need to include it. So essentially what this is saying is for I in range, loop through from 0 all the way up until, but not including the length of my string. Let's put it in there just because we're starting off learning this. So let's save it and click F5. Please enter a string. Let's enter the string hello. And as you can see, it prints off hello just fine. Now, if I was to put the length of the string +1 here, we're going to get an error because it's going to loop through or increase the value of I one more time. And remember that our string would only end at the length of the string of -1. So it's going to give us an index error because it's trying to find an index which we don't have. So if I try and print hello now, we get an index error. So if it prints all the letters and then it's trying to find the next index which doesn't exist. So it gives a string index out of range error. So we would just need this to be like this. And let's print brainstorm. And as you can see, it's working just fine. All right, let's take a look at our application questions. Now, these questions are definitely harder than most of the questions we've looked at prior. So have a go, and then we'll go through the solutions together. So question 1, first prompt the user to enter a string. Store it in a variable called myString. Loop through the string and print every letter on the same line. Change every capital letter to lowercase and every lowercase letter to uppercase. to do this, you should use dot is upper and dot is lower to check if they're uppercase or lowercase. And as a hint, dot lower and dot upper will also come in handy. And as a note, you must use a for loop to answer the question. So let's look at some example input. We've got the string the Bellman-Ford algorithm, and the output is this string here, but wherever we see a capital, it is now a lowercase. And let's take this letter here, that's uppercase, now it's a lowercase a. And a second example is we've got all these numbers here. Now numbers don't have upper or lowercases, so it prints the exact same thing out. Have a go, and then we'll go through it together. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is prompt the user to enter a string. So we're going to call it, we need to store in a variable called myString. MyString is equal to input. Please enter a string. So the user's entered a string. We want to loop through the string and print every letter on the same line. So what we're going to do is we're going to do for letter in MyString. So for every letter that's in the string, what do we want to do? Well, we want to print the letter on the same line. So what we're going to do is we're going to print I, and the end value is going to be nothing because we want to print everything next to each other, right? And then we're going to just include a empty print statement at the very end of the for loop. So once the for loop ends, we want to just include a blank print statement because that's going to stop the cursor from printing on the same line. So it's going to bring the cursor down one. So if I was to save this and run it now, it's just going to print the string out on the idle shell. If I enter the string test, okay, and we've got an error here, and it's a stupid mistake that I made. I've called it I here, and this should actually be a letter. So print the letter with an end of is equal to nothing. So save this and run it, test, and you can see it just prints out test, but we're actually looping through every single letter and printing it out in the idle shell. Okay, so this is not what we want to do. What we want to do is we want to change every capital letter to lowercase and every lowercase letter to uppercase. So what we'll do is we'll say for every letter, we're going to check if it's lowercase or uppercase. So if letter dot is upper is equal to true, so if this boolean is true, what do we want to do? So if the letter is uppercase, and so this will be true, and that's equal to true, true is equal to true is going to evaluate to true because those two things are equal. And in fact, we actually don't need to include the equal statement there. So we could just say if letter dot is upper, so this will evaluate to true, and if true, what do we want to do? So if the letter is uppercase, we want to print the letter in lowercase, just like that. And we're going to have an end value, which is equal to nothing. Else, if the letter is lower, so if the letter is lowercase, well, we want to print the uppercase version of it. So letter dot upper, and we want an end value of nothing. If it's neither upper or lowercase, well, we don't want to do anything. So we're just going to do nothing. So we don't even need to include that in our statement, right? So what do we want to do at the end? We just want to include that blank print statement. And now hopefully if everything's gone right and I click F5 and I type in test, everything should be uppercase. And as you can see, everything is uppercase. So that looks like it is working good. Let's try this string here. So let's enter the string here. And as you can see, well, there is a slight mistake. That mistake is that if the string, or if the letter is neither upper or lowercase, we're not printing it at all. So in this case, we actually do need an else statement. We need to say else, just print the letter, and our end is going to equal nothing. So now, if I save this and click enter, well, looks like it is doing it just fine. So it's converting everything that's upper to lower and everything that's lower to upper. Let's try a string of all ones. So let's run it. And I've actually included that accidentally, but looks like it's working just fine. So anything that's numbers stays the same. So it looks like we've completed the question correctly. Alright, let's look at question 2. Write a program which prints out all the numbers which end in a 6 on the same line from a provided range. All numbers should be separated by a single space. First, prompt the user to enter a starting number. Store this in a variable called start. Next, prompt the user to enter a number to end on, which is inclusive. Store this in a variable called included end. Finally, prompt the user to enter a number to step by. Store this in a variable called step. Then print out the numbers which end in a 6. And you must use a for loop to answer the question. Alright, let's tackle the question. So, we want to prompt the user to enter a starting number, so we need to call it start as well. So start is equal to integer input. Please enter a starting number. We need to prompt the user to enter a number to end on, so I'm just going to copy and paste it. And we're going to call it included end. Enter an ending number, and the last thing we want to do is we want to prompt the user to enter a number to step by. So I'm going to copy and paste this. Please enter a stepping number, and we'll call the variable step. Now we want to print the numbers, so we want to loop through the range and print out the numbers which end in a 6. So in order to do that, we're going to use a for loop. So for I in range. And in fact, we're not going to use I because it's not that descriptive. Let's use for number. In the range, start, included end plus 1. Now, the reason we're using included end plus 1 is because we want to include the end value and our stop value is non-inclusive. So if my included end was 2, then we would need to stop at 3. So included end plus 1, and we want to step by step. So for the number in this range that's going to be given, we want to print out the numbers which end in a 6. So what we'll do is we'll say, if the string version of the number at index -1, so with that final index, or the last index of that string, if it's equal, because we don't know if the number is going to be 1 digit, 2 digits, 3 digits, or 10,000 digits, right? We just want to grab that last digit there. We want to check if it's equal to 6. Now, if it is equal to 6, what do we want to do? Well, we want to print the number, and what we want to do is we want to have an end equal to space. Now, let's save this and run it and see what's happening. So save this and click F5. Our starting number is 1, our stopping value is 50, and our step is 1, and it seems to be printing 6, 16, 26, 36, and 46 just fine. Let's do another example. Let's start at 1. Let's stop at 6, and we want to step by 3, and it prints nothing. The reason for that is that this is non-inclusive, so what it's going to do is it's going to go 1, 4, and 7, and none of those numbers end in 6, so that's why I printed out nothing here. So this one was actually quite a nice, easy question. Okay, let's look at our final question. It's a little bit of a familiar one. The nth Fibonacci number is given by fn is equal to fn minus 1 plus fn minus 2. Write a program which calculates the nth Fibonacci number. You should first prompt the user to enter a value for n, and the first 3 Fibonacci numbers are 1, 1, and 2. And you must use a for loop to answer the question. So in the last video, we used a while loop to answer that question. In this video, we're going to use a for loop. Now, if you are not understanding how this formula works, check out the last video. I went in depth with how we get the Fibonacci numbers. Pause the video, have a go, and then we'll get into it. Alright, first thing we're going to do is prompt the user to enter a value for n. So, we've called it nth value in our example input, so let's call it nth value is equal to integer input with the value, or with the prompt. Let's go. Please enter a number. Now, how are we going to loop through this? So, just like the last view, we're going to check if the nth value entered is 1 or 2, because we know this value. So, if nth value is equal to 1, well, we're just going to return 1. So we're just going to print 1. Else, if the nth value is equal to 2, well, we're going to print 1 as well, because our first two fib numbers are 1 and 1. Else, so if it's none of those things, we're going to run a for loop. We're going to say for, and let's go for n, where n is the current Fibonacci number, in range. And what is our range going to be? Well, remember that if we're going to run this for loop, we're going to always start at the nth value of 3, because if it was 1 or 2, we would have already printed 1. So for n in range 3, all the way up until the nth value, and including the nth value, so plus 1, what do we want to do? Now, how did I get this value here? Well, let's think about it. Let's think about running the for loop just for the value 3. So if we just included the nth value from 3 all the way up until the nth value of 3, well, this for loop would never run. The reason for that is that this, remember, is non-inclusive. So if this number was 3 and this number was 3, well, it wouldn't run. So if this number is 3 and this value is 4 and we step in by 1, we will run this for loop once, and what we can do is we can add the nth values together to get the nth fib number, which will be really good. And yeah, so let's do that. So what do we do inside our for loop? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to calculate our fib number. So we're going to call it newest fib is equal to newest fib is going to be equal to newest fib, sorry, the latest fib added with the second latest fib. Now, note that we haven't actually specified the second latest fib and the latest fib. So why don't we do that before we run the for loop? So latest fib is equal to 1 and second latest fib is equal to 1 at the start, right? So the newest fib is now 1 plus 1, which is equal to 2. Now what do we want to do? So after we've done this, what we need to do is we need to replace second latest fib. So the second latest fib is now what was originally the latest fib, and the latest fib is now the value of newest fib, right? So what we've done is we've taken the latest fib, we've moved it into the second latest fib, we've taken the newest fib and we've moved it into the latest fib, and that's making a way for when we run the next iteration of our for loop to calculate a new value of newest fib. Now again, if this is not making too much sense to you, go and have a look at the diagram I drew in the previous video. So hopefully I've made no mistakes. If we click F5, we enter 1, we get an output of 1. We enter 2, we get an output of 1. We enter 3, and nothing's happened here. That's because we haven't actually printed anything to the outer shell, which is a bit of a rookie mistake, right? So once the for loop has finished executing, we're just going to print the value of, not the value of n, but actually we want to print the value of newest fib. And we actually could print the value of latest fib as well, but let's just print the value of newest fib. Let's click F5. If we click 3, we now get an output of 2. Now, if we were to print n, it would just, so if I print n here, what it will do is it will print the value or the nth Fibonacci number that we go through each time. So for example, if I go 3 here, you can see that we're starting at the third fib number and the output is 2. So I'm just going to comment this line out for now. And let's try it for the 130th fib number. So 130, we get an output of what looks to be the same here. And if I uncomment this out and I put a string here which says int fib number with a comma, and I put 130 here again, so you can see it kind of works through it in real time. So we loop through all fib numbers from 3 all the way up until the 130th fib number, and the 130th fib number is this number here, which seems to agree with the sample output here, so it looks like we've done the question correctly. Awesome guys, thanks for checking out this video on for loops. Now, usually we probably wouldn't be just doing for loops like this, but we'd probably be using for loops for things like lists, dictionaries, tuples. I believe we are looking at lists in the next couple of videos, so that's going to be really good. Leave a like and see you guys in the next video. Cheers.